The twin suns of Kepler 442b cast their warm light across the crystal spires of New Zephyr, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Commander Veltar stood at the observation deck of the orbital defense station, watching the morning light dance across his homeworld's surface. The crystalline cities below sparkled like jewels, their towers reaching toward the heavens with elegant curves that seemed to grow from the earth itself. For 300 years, the Zephyrians had lived in peace. Their world was a paradise of art and learning, where scientists worked alongside philosophers to unlock the mysteries of the universe. Crime was nearly unknown, war was a distant memory, and the greatest concerns were usually debates about the proper cultivation of the singing crystals that powered their civilization. Velet's forearms moved gracefully as he reviewed the morning reports. His crystalline skin caught the light from the console displays, creating small rainbows that danced across his features. Everything seemed normal. The agricultural sectors were producing well, the weather control systems were functioning perfectly, and the latest batch of students from the Academy had submitted their research proposals for evaluation. The first sign of trouble came from the long-range sensors. Technical Specialist Kryden, her young face creased with confusion, called out from her station. "Commander, I am detecting unusual readings from the outer system." Multiple objects approaching at high velocity. Veltar glided over to her station, his feet barely making sound on the polished floor. The sensor display showed a cluster of contacts moving in formation, still too distant to identify clearly. "Origin point?" he asked. "Unknown, sir. They appeared suddenly at the edge of our detection range. No jump signatures, no energy trails. They are maintaining course directly toward our world." A cold feeling began to spread through Veltar's chest. The Zephyrians had long-range sensors capable of detecting ships from several light-years away, but these contacts had appeared without warning. That suggested technology far beyond anything the peaceful Zephyrians possessed: increased sensor resolution. "I want to know what we are looking at." The display flickered and sharpened. What they saw made everyone on the command deck freeze in horror. The objects were massive, angular ships with hulls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their design was brutal and efficient, built for one purpose: war. "Krillian dreadnoughts," whispered Kryden, her voice barely audible. 200 of them. The name sent a wave of terror through the station. Every child in the galaxy knew stories of the Krillians, the species that had conquered half the known worlds through sheer brutality. They were slavers, destroyers, creatures who viewed other species as nothing more than resources to be harvested. "How long until they reach us?" Veltar asked, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his heart. "At current speed, 14 hours until they enter our system. 8 hours until they reach orbital range." Veltar closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his mate and their young offspring down in the crystal cities, thinking of the billions of innocent Zephyrians who would wake tomorrow to find their world transformed into a nightmare. "Sound the emergency alert. Begin immediate evacuation of all civilian populations to the deep shelters. Contact the Planetary Defense Force and tell them to activate all available weapon systems." Even as he gave the orders, Veltar knew they were meaningless. The Zephyrians had no military to speak of. Their defense force consisted of a few patrol ships designed to deal with space debris and the occasional asteroid. Their weapons were mining lasers and construction tools, utterly useless against ships built for conquest. The next few hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Across the planet, crystal cities began to dim as their populations fled to underground shelters. The beautiful spires that had taken centuries to grow were abandoned as their creators sought safety in the depths of their world, but there was no real safety to be found. The Krillian ships entered the system like harbingers of doom, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. They moved with terrifying precision, surrounding the planet in a formation that spoke of countless previous conquests. The first attack came without warning. Beams of pure energy lanced down from the Krillian ships, striking the orbital defense platforms with devastating effect. Veltar watched in horror as installations that had protected his world for generations were vaporized. In seconds, all communication arrays are being targeted, reported Crichton, her voice tight with fear. They are trying to cut us off from the outside. Veltar made a decision that would haunt him forever. Open an emergency channel on all frequencies. Maximum power. Sir, if we do that, they will detect our location and destroy us. They will destroy us anyway. At least this way someone might know what happened here. The communication array powered up, sending a desperate message across the galaxy. Veltar spoke into the transmitter, knowing these might be his last words. This is Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Defense Force. Our world is under attack by Krillian forces. We have no military capability to resist. 17 million civilians are trapped. We formally request immediate assistance from any allied species. Please, someone help us. The message repeated 3 times before a Krillian energy beam found the communication array and turned it to vapor. The station shuddered as secondary explosions rocked the structure on the planet below. The real horror was beginning. Krillian assault ships landed in the crystal cities, disgorging troops that moved with mechanical precision. They began herding civilians into processing centers, separating the young and strong from the old and weak. The Zephyrians offered no resistance. It was not in their nature to fight, and they had no weapons even if they had wanted to use them. They went quietly, their crystalline features showing only resignation and despair. Meanwhile, Veltar's desperate message traveled across the galaxy at the speed of light. It reached the Altarian Federation first, their advanced communication networks picking up the signal within hours in the great council chambers of Altair Prime. The Federation's leaders gathered to discuss the crisis. The debate was brief and predictable. The Krillians were too powerful, too dangerous. The risk of intervention was too great. We must consider our own people first, declared Chancellor Morden, his tentacles waving with emphasis. The Zephyrians are already lost. We cannot sacrifice our own worlds for a hopeless cause. The vote was unanimous. The Altarian Federation would not intervene. The same scene played out across the galaxy. The Centauri Republic, the Vegan Empire, the Consortium of Free Worlds, all received the message, all debated, all decided that the risk was too great. The Krillians had never been defeated in open battle, and no one wanted to be the first to try, but the message traveled further than just the great powers. It reached the frontier regions, the outer colonies, the places where civilization grew, thin and desperate. It reached a small farming world called New Colorado, where human settlers had carved out a life among the red rocks and endless sky. In the modest town hall of New Colorado, Mayor Jake Morrison played the translated message for his people. The room was packed with farmers, miners, and mechanics. Simple people who had come to this world seeking a better life. The message crackled through the speakers, Veltar's voice carrying across impossible distances. When it finished, the room fell silent. Lisa Parker stood up. She had been a soldier once, back on Earth, before she came to this world to grow crops and raise children. Now she stood before her neighbors, her face hard with determination. I don't care if we're outgunned, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Those people are dying and no one else is coming, the crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in fear. These were not warriors, not heroes from the stories. They were ordinary people living ordinary lives, but something stirred in that room, something that made them different from the great powers who had already decided to look away. It was something simple and powerful and uniquely human. It was the absolute refusal to abandon others in their darkest hour. The message from New Colorado spread through human space like wildfire. Within hours, every human colony, every space station, every ship in the void had heard about the desperate plea from the Zephyrians. More importantly, they had heard about the decision made by a handful of farmers and miners on a frontier world on Earth. In the great command center buried beneath the mountains of Colorado, Admiral John Carter received the emergency transmission. His weathered face showed no emotion as he listened to the report from his communications officer. Sir, we are receiving similar messages from 17 different colonies. They are all asking the same thing. When do we leave to help the Zephyrians? Carter rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of command pressing down on him. He had fought in 3 wars, commanded fleets in battles that decided the fate of worlds, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Convene the Defense Council, he ordered. Emergency session. All department heads are to report immediately. The council chamber filled quickly with the most important military leaders in human space. General Paul Stevens, his gray hair cropped short in military fashion, took his seat with obvious reluctance. Intelligence Officer Amanda Ross arrived with a stack of reports, her face grim with the weight of bad news. "Let me be clear about what we are facing," Ross began, activating the holographic display. "The Krillian fleet consists of 200 capital ships. Each one is the size of a city and carries enough firepower to sterilize a planet. They have conquered 47 worlds in the past century, and they have never been defeated in open battle." The room fell silent as the display showed the massive alien warships. Their dark hulls seemed to absorb light, making them appear like holes in space itself. "Our combined fleet numbers 47 vessels," continued Ross. "Most of these are exploration ships that have been retrofitted with basic weapons. We have no ships that can match even their smallest escort vessel in terms of firepower or armor." General Stevens leaned forward, his voice heavy with frustration. "This is not a battle, Admiral. This is suicide. We would be sending our people to die for nothing." Captain Ryan Cole, commander of the exploration vessel Defiance, stood up from his seat. His ship was one of the few that actually carried military-grade weapons, though they were primitive compared to what the Krillians possessed with. "Respect, General. When has that ever stopped us?" Cole's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who had faced impossible odds before. "My grandfather fought in World War II with a rifle against tanks. My father flew missions over Korea knowing he might not come home. Sometimes you don't fight because you can win. You fight because it is right." The debate that followed was fierce and passionate. Some argued for caution, for the preservation of human lives and human civilization. Others spoke of duty, of the moral obligation to help those who could not help themselves. Admiral Carter listened to both sides, his mind racing through the possibilities. He thought of his own children, safe in their schools on Earth. He thought of the millions of humans who trusted him to protect them. He thought of the Zephyrians, dying alone while the galaxy watched. "The question is not whether we can win," Carter said finally. "The question is whether we can live with ourselves if we do nothing." The vote was close, closer than anyone had expected. But in the end, humanity chose to act. The order went out across human space within the hour. Every ship capable of making the journey to Kepler 442b was to prepare for immediate departure. The response was overwhelming. Captain Emma Brooks, commander of the medical frigate Mercy, was among the first to volunteer. Her ship was designed for humanitarian missions, with advanced medical facilities and surgical suites. She knew that if they were going to save lives, they would need every doctor and medic they could find. Dr. Richard Hayes, the chief medical officer aboard the Mercy, worked frantically to prepare mobile surgical units. His equipment was basic compared to what the Zephyrians probably had, but it was reliable and could function in combat conditions. "We need to be ready for anything," Hayes told his staff as they loaded supplies. "We don't know what condition the survivors will be in or what kind of injuries we will be treating." Across the fleet, similar preparations were taking place. Freighter captains welded weapon pods to their cargo haulers. Mining vessels had their industrial equipment replaced with military-grade shields. Even civilian transports volunteered to carry emergency supplies and medical equipment. The transformation was remarkable. Ships that had been designed to explore, to trade, to build were being converted into vessels of war. It was not a professional military force, but it was something more important. It was humanity at its best. Captain Julie Peterson, commander of the fighter escort Falcon, gathered her pilots for a final briefing. Most of them were young, barely out of training, but their faces showed the same determination that had driven their species to reach for the stars. "We are not going to win this fight through superior technology," Peterson told them. "We are going to win through superior courage, superior determination, and superior refusal to give up." The Krillians may have better ships, but they have never faced anything like us. The first ships began departing within 6 hours of the decision, Captain. Brooks led the medical vessels, pushing their engines to maximum speed. Every minute they delayed meant more Zephyrian lives lost as the fleet prepared to jump. They received updated intelligence from automated Zephyrian probes that had escaped the initial attack. The news was devastating. The Krillians had completed their orbital bombardment and were now herding survivors into processing center's intelligence. Officer Ross translated the probe data for Admiral Carter. The Krillians are preparing to transport the survivors to their slave worlds. They are separating families, taking the young and strong first. We estimate they are processing about 50,000 civilians per day. Carter felt sick. Every day they delayed meant 50,000 more people condemned to slavery or death. How long until the main fleet is ready? 18 hours for full deployment. The advanced scouts can leave in 6 hours. Send the scouts now. Every ship that can make the journey leaves immediately. We cannot wait for perfect coordination as the human fleet began its desperate journey. News of their mission spread throughout the galaxy. The advanced civilizations that had refused to help watched with a mixture of admiration and horror. The humans were brave, but they were also foolish. They were going to die for nothing but on the frontier worlds in the colonies. Where life was hard and survival was never guaranteed, the response was different. These people understood what it meant to face impossible odds. They understood what it meant to help your neighbor even when you could barely help yourself. The human fleet that finally assembled for the jump to Kepler 442b was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was not a professional military force with matching ships and coordinated tactics. It was a collection of miners, farmers, doctors, and explorers who had decided that some things were worth dying for. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Liberty, and looked out at the ragtag fleet that would carry humanity into battle. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed in every way that mattered to military strategists, but they had something the Krillians had never encountered in all their conquests. They had the absolute refusal to abandon others in their darkest hour. They had the kind of courage that came not from training or technology, but from the simple human belief that everyone deserved a chance. All ships. Carter broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Carter. We are not going to Kepler 442b to win a war. We are going to save lives. Stay focused on that mission. Prepare for jump. The fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with it the hopes and fears of an entire species. Behind them, Earth continued its quiet rotation, unaware that the course of galactic history was about to change forever. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace to find hell waiting for them. Kepler 442b hung in the void like a dying ember, its once beautiful surface scarred by orbital bombardment. The crystal cities that had sparkled in the twin suns now lay in ruins, their elegant spires reduced to glittering rubble. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Liberty, his face grim as he surveyed the devastation. The Krillian fleet hung in high orbit like a swarm of metal locusts, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. 200 massive warships arranged in perfect formation, each one bristling with weapons that could crack a planet enemy fleet detected, reported Lieutenant Commander Nina Walsh, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They are moving to intercept. Time to engagement, 47 minutes, Carter nodded, his mind already calculating the impossible odds. His ragtag fleet of 47 ships faced an enemy force that had never known defeat. The Krillians had conquered half the galaxy with brutal efficiency, leaving behind only slavery and death. All ships. This is Admiral Carter, he broadcast on all frequencies. We are not here to win a war, we are here to save lives. Stay focused on that mission. Medical ships are to proceed directly to the planet. Combat vessels will provide cover. The response came immediately from Captain Brooks aboard the Mercy. Medical team standing by, Admiral? We are ready to save as many as we can. The first Krillian ships moved to intercept them, their massive bulk accelerating with surprising speed. These were not clumsy giants, but perfectly engineered instruments of war, each one capable of destroying Entire fleets single-handedly Captain Kyle Murphy, commanding the converted freighter Ranger, watched the approaching enemy with calm determination. His ship had been a cargo hauler just days ago. Now it carried enough firepower to level a city. It was not nearly enough, all weapons charged and ready, Murphy reported to his crew. Remember what we came here to do. We are buying time for the medical ships to reach the surface. The first energy beams lanced through space. Brilliant streams of destruction that vaporized the lead human vessels in seconds. The Ranger took a direct hit from a Krillian dreadnought. Its hull cracking like an eggshell under the assault. Murphy felt his ship dying around him. Systems failing throughout the vessel, but he had one last card to play. All hands, prepare for ramming speed. We are going to give them something to remember us by. The Ranger accelerated directly toward the Krillian command ship, its engines screaming at maximum power. The alien vessel tried to turn away, but Murphy had timed his approach perfectly. The collision sent shockwaves through both ships, the human freighter disappearing in a ball of fire that took half the enemy vessel with it. The sacrifice was not in vain. The gap in the Krillian formation allowed the medical ships to slip through, racing toward the burning planet below. Captain Brooks pushed the Mercy to its limits, knowing that every second counted on the planet's surface, the first human rescue. Teams were already landing. Sergeant Alex Turner led a squad of Marines through the ruins of New Zephyr, their primitive weapons seeming pathetic against the towering crystal structures. The sight that greeted them was worse than anything they had imagined. Thousands of Zephyrians stood in energy cages, their crystalline features dulled by despair. Krillian guards moved between the prisoners with mechanical precision, separating families and loading the strongest onto transport ships. My God, whispered Private Danny Scott, his young face pale with horror. There are so many of them. Turner raised his rifle, the chemical propellant weapon crude but effective. We get them out. All of them. That is why we came here. The firefight that followed was brutal and desperate. The Krillians had superior weapons and armor, but the humans had something their enemies had never encountered, the absolute refusal to retreat when innocent lives were at stake. Commander Veltar watched from his cage as the strange bipedal creatures fought with impossible courage. He had given up hope days ago, resigned to watching his people disappear into slavery. Now these aliens had come from nowhere, throwing themselves into battle against overwhelming odds. Who are they? He asked another prisoner, his voice barely. A whisper, I do not know, came the reply. But they are fighting for us. Turner's squad fought their way to the control center, their weapons blazing. The Krillian guards fell back, confused by the humans' tactics. These creatures fought like demons, showing no fear of death or injury. Dr. Hayes arrived with the first medical team, his portable equipment already working on the wounded. Zephyrians watched in amazement as the human doctor treated their injuries with equipment that looked primitive but worked with surprising effectiveness. We are getting you out of here, Hayes told Veltar as he worked on the commander's injuries. My name is Richard Hayes. I am a doctor from Earth. Veltar's crystalline eyes reflected wonder and disbelief. Earth? I have never heard of this world. Why have you come to help us? Hayes paused in his work, looking up at the alien commander. Because that is what we do. We do not abandon people who need help. Above them, the space battle raged with increasing intensity. Captain Julie Peterson led her squadron of fighters in a desperate attack on a Krillian cruiser, their nuclear missiles crude but devastating. The alien ship staggered under the assault, its shields flickering target their weapon systems, Peterson ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. We need to keep them busy while the transports load. The Krillian commander, War Captain Thakmer, watched the battle from his flagship with growing confusion. His forces were winning, but the humans kept fighting with a ferocity that defied logic. They threw themselves into battle knowing they would die, all to save a species they had never met. They fight like the demons of the old Thales, he growled to his tactical officer. No rational species would continue this assault, but the humans were not being rational. They were being human, and that made all the difference. Ship after ship fell to the Krillian guns, but each death bought precious time for the evacuation. Transport's Captain Brooks felt the Mercy shudder as enemy fire found its mark. Her medical ship was not built for combat, but she pushed it deeper into the atmosphere, racing to reach the surface before the engines failed completely. All hands, prepare for emergency landing, she announced over the intercom. We are going to land this ship one way or another. The Mercy crashed into the ruins of the Zephyrian capital, its hull cracking but holding together. Brooks and her crew emerged from the wreckage, immediately setting up triage centers in the rubble. They had work to do. The evacuation continued through the night, human ships landing under fire to load desperate refugees. The Zephyrians could barely believe what they were seeing. These strange aliens had come from across the galaxy to die for them. Lieutenant Sarah Kim coordinated the loading of Transport 7, her voice steady over the radio despite the explosions around her. We have room for 200 more civilians. Keep them coming. The transports were overloaded, packed far beyond their safe capacity, but no one complained. Every life saved was a victory against the darkness that had consumed so many worlds. Zaz. Dawn broke over the devastated planet. The human fleet prepared for the final phase of the evacuation. They had saved millions, but the cost had been terrible. Half their ships were gone. Thousands of crew members dead or wounded. Admiral Carter looked out at his battered fleet, his heart heavy with loss but proud of what they had accomplished. All ships prepare for final withdrawal. We have done what we came to do. The last transport ships lifted off from the burning surface, carrying their precious cargo to safety. Behind them, the ruins of New Zephyr continued to smolder, but hope had been kindled in the darkness. The galaxy would never be the same. The battle entered its second day with no sign of ending. More human ships arrived throughout the morning, small groups that had pushed their engines beyond safe limits to reach the fight. They were miners from the asteroid belt, cargo runners from the outer colonies, even a few pleasure craft whose owners had decided that saving lives was more important than their own safety. Captain Sam Johnson commanded the mining vessel Prospector, its hull reinforced with armor plating meant to protect against asteroid impacts. His ship was slow and clumsy, but it was also nearly indestructible. Johnson had a plan that would either save hundreds of lives or get him killed. All crew to escape pods, he ordered, his voice calm despite what he was about to do. Set the pods for automatic launch in 60 seconds, the Prospector accelerated toward a Krillian cruiser that was blocking the escape route for 3 human transports. The alien ship fired everything it had at the approaching mining vessel, but the reinforced hull absorbed the punishment. Johnson held his course, his hands steady on the controls. The collision was spectacular. The Prospector's massive bulk tore through the Krillian ship's shields and armor, ripping a hole that exposed the vessel's core systems to space. Both ships disappeared in a ball of fire, but the transports were free to escape with their cargo of refugees on the planet's surface. The rescue operations had taken on a desperate urgency. Human soldiers fought alongside Zephyrian resistance, fighters who had emerged from hiding to help save their people. The aliens were amazed by human tenacity, watching these strange creatures fight with a fury that seemed to defy all reason. Major Lisa Parker had taken command of the combined human Zephyrian forces defending the main spaceport. Her voice crackled over the radio as she coordinated the defense against wave after wave of Krillian attacks. Fall back to defensive position, Charlie, she ordered, watching another group of evacuation ships lift off into the smoke-filled sky. We need to hold this position for another 2 hours. The Zephyrians who fought beside her could not understand why these humans continued to risk their lives. Parker's left arm was in a makeshift sling. Her face was covered with dust and blood. But she never stopped moving, never stopped fighting. Why do you do this? Asked Crichton, the young Zephyrian who had detected the first Krillian ships. Your people are dying for us. We are not even the same species. Parker reloaded her weapon, her movements automatic after years of training. Because that is who we are. We do not leave people behind. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that the Zephyrian could not fully understand. These humans had come from across the galaxy to die for people they had never met, asking nothing in return except the Chance to do what was right in space, Admiral Carter watched his fleet dwindle with each passing hour. The Liberty had taken severe damage, its hull breached in a dozen places. Life support was failing, but Carter refused to abandon his post. Admiral, we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command, reported Walsh, her console sparking. From damaged circuits. Carter listened to the message with growing amazement. More human ships were coming, volunteers from every corner of human space. They would not arrive in time to affect the current battle, but they were coming anyway. It seems the entire human fleet has decided to join us, Carter said to his bridge crew. Every ship that can make the journey is heading this way, the news spread through the battered human fleet, giving hope to crews who had been fighting for their lives for hours. They were not alone in this fight. Humanity had made its choice, and that choice was to never abandon those who needed help. Captain Cole watched from the bridge of the Defiance as another wave of Krillian fighters approached his position. His ship was running on emergency power, most of its weapons destroyed, but Cole had one option left: engineering. Route all remaining power to the engines, he ordered. We are going to ram the command ship. The Defiance accelerated toward the massive Krillian dreadnought, its damaged hull trailing debris in atmosphere. The alien ship tried to turn away, but Cole had timed his approach perfectly. The explosion when the two ships collided lit up the entire system. The Krillian command ship's bridge disappeared in a ball of fire, taking with it the tactical coordination that had made the alien fleet so effective. War Captain Thakmer died in that explosion. His last thought, a mixture of confusion and something that might have been respect. These humans fought with a code he could not understand, a willingness to sacrifice everything for others that went against every instinct his species possessed. With their command ship destroyed, the Krillian fleet began to lose coordination. Individual captains made their own decisions, some retreating to safer positions, others pressing attacks that were no longer part of a larger strategy. The humans seized the opportunity immediately. Captain Peterson led her remaining fighters in a coordinated strike on the Krillian troop transports, forcing them to release thousands of Zephyrian prisoners. The sight of their people being freed gave new hope to the resistance fighters on the surface. Dr. Hayes worked tirelessly in his field hospital, treating both human and Zephyrian casualties with equal care. His medical teams had been working for over 30 hours without rest, but none of them complained. They had come here to save lives, and that was exactly what they were doing, Doctor. We have wounded coming in from Sector 7, called Nurse Janet Mills. Her uniform stained with the blood of a dozen different species. Hayes looked up from the Zephyrian child he was treating, his face exhausted but determined. Set up another triage station in the West Wing. We are not turning anyone away. The evacuation. Ships continued their desperate runs to the surface, loading refugees under fire from Krillian ground forces. Transport pilots pushed their vessels beyond all safety limits, cramming in as many civilians as possible before racing back to the safety of hyperspace. Lieutenant Kim stood at the loading ramp of Transport 12, helping elderly Zephyrians climb aboard. Her ship was already overloaded, but she could not bear to leave anyone behind. We can take 50 more, she radioed to the ground teams. Ignoring the protests from her co-pilot about weight limits, the Zephyrians who boarded her ship looked at Kim with wonder and gratitude. This young human woman was risking her life to save people she had never met, asking nothing in return except the knowledge that she had done the right thing. As the second day turned into night, the tide of battle began to shift. The human fleet was nearly destroyed, but they had accomplished something no one thought possible. They had disrupted the Krillian war machine, saved millions of civilians, and shown the galaxy that even the most powerful empire could be challenged. Commander Veltar stood in the command center of the human hospital ship Sanctuary, watching the evacuation proceed with tears in his crystalline eyes. His world was dying, his civilization destroyed, but his people would survive because these strange aliens had refused to abandon them. How many have we saved? He asked Dr. Hayes, who was coordinating the medical care for the refugees. Hayes consulted his tablet, his face showing both exhaustion and pride. 8 million so far, with more ships arriving every hour. We are going to get them all out. The promise seemed impossible. But Veltar was beginning to believe that humans specialized in achieving the impossible. They had already done more than anyone thought possible, and they showed no signs of stopping outside the ship's viewports. The battle continued to rage, but something had changed. The Krillians were no longer fighting with their usual confidence. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they faced an enemy that refused to be defeated. Galaxy was watching, and the galaxy was learning what humanity truly meant. The final phase of the evacuation began as the third day dawned over the burning world. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of the Liberty, his flagship listing heavily as atmosphere leaked from dozens of hull breaches. Half his fleet was gone, thousands of crew members dead, but the mission continued. "Admiral, we are receiving reports from all evacuation zones," Walsh reported, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation. "Transport ships are loading the last civilian groups now," Carter nodded, his weathered face showing the strain of 3 days of constant battle. The human fleet had been reduced to 12 operational vessels, but they had achieved something miraculous. Over 8 million Zephyrians were safe aboard the evacuation ships, racing toward the safety of human space on the planet's surface. Major Parker led the final rearguard action. Her combined human Zephyrian force held the main spaceport against desperate Krillian attacks, buying precious time for the last transports to escape. All evacuation ships report full capacity. Came the radio transmission from the spaceport control tower. Final transport lifting off in 60 seconds. Parker watched the last ship rise into the smoke-filled sky, its hull gleaming in the light of the burning cities. She had done her job, but the cost had been terrible. Of the 200 soldiers who had landed with her, only 37 remained. All units, fall back to the emergency extraction point, she ordered, her voice calm despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Mission accomplished, the Krillians pursued them through the ruins, their mechanical precision now replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. For the first time in their history of conquest, they had failed to complete a harvesting operation. Millions of slaves had escaped. Their Graspor Captain Vexman, who had taken command after Thakmer's death, watched the human evacuation with growing fury. These primitive aliens had cost him the greatest prize his fleet had ever attempted to claim. "All ships, concentrate fire on the remaining human vessels," he ordered. "I want them destroyed before they can escape." The remaining Krillian ships converged on the battered human fleet, their weapons charging for a final devastating assault. It seemed impossible that any of the human ships could survive what was coming, but help arrived from an unexpected source. Throughout the galaxy, word of the human rescue mission had spread like wildfire. The advanced civilizations that had refused to help were watching in shame as these primitive aliens accomplished what they had deemed impossible on the bridge of the Altarian flagship Starfire. Chancellor Morden faced a revolt among his own officers. His second-in-command, Admiral Kanthara, stood before him with barely contained anger. "We cannot let them die," Kanthara declared, her tentacles writhing with emotion. "These humans have shown us what honor truly means. I am taking the fleet to help them." Morden tried to object, but he found himself facing a mutiny. His entire bridge crew supported Kanthara, and throughout the Altarian fleet, captains were declaring their intention to join the rescue mission. The first non-human ships to arrive at Kepler 442b belonged to the Vegan Empire. Admiral Zorthak had been following the human transmissions for 3 days, watching in amazement as these unknown aliens fought impossible odds to save people they had never met. "All ships, target the Krillian fleet," Zorthak ordered. "We are going to cover the human withdrawal." The arrival of the vegan warships changed everything. Their advanced weapons cut through the Krillian formation like knives through paper, forcing the enemy fleet to break off their attack on the human ships. More ships arrived every hour. The Centauri Republic sent their fastest cruisers, their captains ashamed that they had not acted sooner. The Consortium of Free Worlds dispatched their entire border patrol fleet, their crews eager to fight alongside the humans who had shown such incredible courage. Admiral Carter watched in amazement as alien ships he had never seen before took positions around his battered fleet. His communications officer was receiving transmissions in dozens of languages, all offering assistance. "Admiral, this is Admiral Kanthara of the Altarian Defense Force," came the translation through the universal communicator. "We are here to escort you and the refugees to safety." Carter felt tears in his eyes as he realized what was happening. The galaxy that had abandoned the Zephyrians was now coming to help the humans who had refused to abandon them. The evacuation convoy that finally formed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human transports packed with Zephyrian refugees were escorted by warships from a dozen different species, all united by shame and admiration for what humanity had accomplished on the hospital ship Sanctuary. Commander Veltar found Admiral Carter in the medical bay, receiving treatment for injuries sustained during the battle. The human admiral looked old and tired, but his eyes still held the determination that had driven him to attempt the impossible. "Why?" Veltar asked, the same question he had asked Dr. Hayes days earlier. "Your people have paid such a terrible price. Why did you come when no one else would?" Carter looked up at the Zephyrian commander, his voice weak but steady. "Because that is what we do. We do not abandon people who need help. That is not who we are." The simple words carried a weight that resonated throughout the ship. The Zephyrian refugees who heard them began to understand something fundamental about these humans who had saved them. Dr. Hayes continued his work in the medical bays, treating both human and alien patients with equal care. His teams had worked for 72 hours straight, but none of them had complained. They had come here to save lives, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The convoy reached the safety of human space after a journey of 6 days. The refugee ships were met by thousands of volunteers, humans who had prepared temporary housing and medical facilities for the Zephyrian survivors. The integration process began immediately. The Zephyrians, grateful beyond words, began sharing their advanced technology with their human saviors. Crystal growing techniques, energy manipulation systems, medical knowledge that was centuries ahead of human science, but more importantly, they shared something else. They became the first alien species to truly understand what humanity meant. What drove these strange bipedal creatures to risk everything for others? The news of the rescue spread throughout the galaxy like a shockwave. The advanced civilizations that had refused to help found themselves facing questions from their own people. Why had they allowed primitive humans to show them what courage truly meant? On Earth, the survivors of the human fleet were welcomed as heroes. Admiral Carter, his arm in a sling and his face scarred by battle, stood before the global assembly to deliver his report. "We lost 35 ships and over 6,000 crew members," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of human space. "But we saved 8.3 million innocent civilians from slavery and death. That is a trade I would make again without hesitation." The assembly erupted in applause, but Carter raised his hand for silence. "The real heroes are not here today. They died in the void around Kepler 442b, or in the ruins of alien cities, fighting for people they had never met. They died because they believe that some things are worth dying for." Commander Veltar, now serving as the Zephyrian ambassador to Earth, stood to address the assembly. His crystalline features caught the light as he spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "No one came to rescue us when we called for help," he said, his voice carrying the weight of his entire species' gratitude. "The great powers of the galaxy turned away, deciding we were not worth the risk, but humans came. Humans who had every reason to stay safe, who had nothing to gain from helping us, who faced certain death by coming to our aid." He paused, looking out at the sea of human faces. "You have shown us something we thought was lost in this galaxy. You have shown us that honor still exists, that courage still matters, that some species will risk everything to do what is right." The Zephyrian refugees began to rebuild their lives in human space, but they never forgot the lesson they had learned. They became humanity's first true allies, bound not by treaties or mutual benefit, but by the memory of sacrifice and the understanding of what it meant to be saved by those who owed them nothing. The galaxy was forever changed. The rescue of Zephyrians became a legend that spread to every world, every species, every corner of known space. It was the story of how humanity announced itself to the universe, not with conquest or threats, but with the simple declaration that they would never abandon those who needed help years later. When other species faced extinction, they no longer called upon the great powers of the galaxy. They called upon humanity, knowing that these strange aliens would come. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, the humans always came.